You're sitting in a diner booth in a town you'd never heard of 6 months ago, and a woman in her late 50s is sliding a folder across a sticky laminate table. She says a number out loud, and it's the first time she said it to anyone who isn't her accountant. You have $65,000 and a spreadsheet nobody else has ever seen. By the time this ends, you'll control 17 companies and a business worth north of $370 million. She spent 26 years building the thing in that folder, and the part nobody tells you at the start is that there's almost no one left willing to buy it. Most small businesses that go up for sale in this country never find a buyer at all. The folder slides towards you not because you're impressive, it slides towards you because you're still sitting there after everyone else left the table. Level 1. The searcher. You are 29, you have $65,000 in a savings account and a spreadsheet with 700 businesses pulled from broker sites, court filings, and county business licenses. You are not buying anything yet. You are looking, and looking is unpaid work that feels like a job without ever paying like one. The model has a name, self-funded search. The math is unforgiving. You want a business generating close to $900,000 a year in what the industry calls sellers' discretionary earnings. The real cash an owner takes home once you strip out the fiction. Businesses that size typically sell for 3 to 3.5 times that number, which puts your target price around $3.1 million. You have $65,000. The distance between those two numbers is the entire problem you spend the next year solving. You teach yourself to read a profit and loss statement the way a plumber listens to a pipe. You learn that the man who built the business has been running his hunting truck, his daughter's car payment, and half his family's groceries through the company for a decade, and that pulling the real number out from underneath his version of the story is the only skill that actually matters here. Every dollar of those add-backs you can defend on paper raises what a bank will let you pay by $3 or $4. So you learn to fight for the legitimate ones and throw out the ones that won't survive a lender's questions. You drive 3 hours to look at a commercial pressure washing company and the owner doesn't want to sell you anything. He wants someone to sit across from him and tell him it's okay to stop. You learn the difference between deals everyone can see and the ones almost nobody does. The listed businesses are picked over, shopped around, bid up by people with deeper pockets than you'll ever have. The real opportunity is the owner who hasn't decided to sell yet. The one you reach before there's a broker and a bidding war and 6 other buyers circling the same folder. So you start mailing the ones who never raise their hand. The first business you fall for dies on the table. The numbers look clean until you ask one plain question: who are your 2 biggest customers? And the answer is that a single hospital contract is 55% of revenue, and that contract renews in 7 months with no guarantee it renews at all. That isn't a business. That's one signature away from being nothing. No bank would lend against it, and neither should you. You walk away. It costs you 6 weeks and a lawyer's retainer, and you learn more from that dead deal than from any of the ones that go smoothly later. This is where most searchers quit. Somewhere between the 9th dead lead and the morning it finally lands that nobody is going to hand you anything for free. You send 38 letters in a single month. You get 3 replies. One of them is the folder. What you don't know yet is that the folder is going to cost you every dollar you have plus your name on paper you can never fully undo. Level 2. The buyer. The folder becomes a number, and the number is $3,150,000. You are 30. You do not have $3,150,000. So you learn how a person with $65,000 buys something worth almost 50 times that. The answer is that you don't. The bank does. You just sign for it. The instrument is a government-backed loan program that can fund up to $5 million against exactly this kind of acquisition. The structure is a stack. The bank funds roughly 80%. The seller herself carries a note for another 10 to 15%, which means the woman across the table is quietly lending you a slice of her own, asking price, and betting on a stranger she met twice. You write a check for the remaining 10%, $315,000. You have $65,000. You raise the rest from a former coworker and your uncle, both of whom take a small equity slice for it, and your savings account drops to almost nothing in a single wire transfer. Then you learn the trick that buys you room to breathe. The seller's note can count toward your own required equity under the loan's rules, but only if it sits on full standby, meaning she can't collect $1 of principal or interest on it for 2 full years. You ask a woman who spent 26 years building this thing to wait 2 more years to see a cent of that piece, and she agrees, because she wants the deal to close as badly as you do. Before any of it funds, the bank sends in its own accountants to take the business apart, a quality of earnings review, and they find she's been counting a chunk of next quarter's prepaid contracts as this year's revenue, which quietly shaves the real number and nearly kills the price entirely. Then comes the working capital peg, the part nobody warns you about, where you argue for days over exactly how much cash and unbilled work she has to leave inside the company on closing day. If she sweeps the accounts clean on her way out, you inherit a business that can't make payroll in its first 2 weeks. You win that fight by inches. Then the attorney slides one more page across the table. Because you'll own more than 20% of the company, you're signing an unlimited personal guarantee. The bank takes a lien on your house. If this business dies, you don't just lose the business, you lose the place you sleep. You sign anyway. She shakes your hand, and for the first time you notice she looks relieved instead of richer. You are 30 years old, $2.8 million in debt, and tomorrow you have to walk into a building full of people who've worked there longer than you've been alive and tell them you're in charge now. Level 3, the operator. The first morning, nobody looks at you. You learn exactly what a signature on a loan document is worth on a job site, which is nothing at all. The operations manager who's run daily routes for 14 years answers your questions like each one costs him something personal. The woman who handles billing has a faster read on the company's real margin than the accountant you hired. This is the level that quietly ends most people's climb. You took on nearly $3 million in debt to buy yourself a job. Your salary is $175,000, but the loan payment eats the cash before it ever reaches you. You learn the one number the bank actually watches: debt service coverage, the ratio of cash the business throws off against what it owes the lender each month. The bank wants that ratio sitting around 1.25. The month it drops below 1, the cushion is gone and the loan payment starts coming out of money the business doesn't have. So you do the unglamorous things. You raise prices the previous owner was too polite to raise in years. You drop the customer who's been paying 90 days late since before you were an adult. You sit with the 14-year operations manager at the same diner where you first read the folder, and instead of pitching him on anything, you ask what he'd fix if the company were his. You do 3 of the 4 things he tells you. On the 4th morning after that conversation, he starts actually looking at you when you walk in. By year 3, the business clears close to $700,000 a year after the loan and taxes. The debt is shrinking. The lien on your house is still there, but the fear has dulled into a line item on a monthly statement. And that's the trap of this level. You're comfortable. One business, paid down, throwing off $700,000 a year. Most people stop right here, and a quieter version of you probably would too. But the folder taught you something the comfortable version doesn't know yet. Thousands of owners cross retirement age every single week in this country, and you just learned how to catch one. Level 4, the acquirer. You are 34. You own one company outright, and you're about to do something the bank would have called reckless 4 years ago. Buy a second one and use the first as the engine. Here's the mechanism nobody outside this world ever sees, and it's the entire reason a holding company exists at all. You buy small companies one at a time at 3 or 3.5 times their earnings, because at that size, the price is tied to one tired owner and his personal income. But the moment 2 or 3 of them sit under the same roof, sharing bookkeeping, sharing trucks, sharing a back office, the combined thing stops being priced like a single owner's paycheck and starts being priced like a real company. The same dollar of profit that was worth 3 times inside a small business is suddenly worth 6 or 7 times inside a bigger one. You aren't getting smarter. You're buying the same cash flow cheap and holding it somewhere it's worth double. That gap has a name. Multiple arbitrage. It's the closest thing to a free lunch this industry offers. This is where you stop being an operator and start being an allocator. You hire a general manager to run the first business day to day. You hire a controller to keep the books clean across both companies. Your calendar is no longer a job site. It's the next deal, the next loan application, the next owner in his 60s deciding whether you're the one he trusts. But you're also borrowing against borrowing now. Every new acquisition adds another personal guarantee with your signature on it, another lien, another business that has to perform, or the whole structure starts to lean. One deal closes in the spring, a small dumpster and roll-off rental company, and the owner has a stroke 11 weeks after the sale. His longtime dispatcher quits the same month. Just like that, you own a business with almost nobody left who understands how it actually runs. The cushion you spent 4 years building thins out in a single quarter, and you're up at 3 a.m. running numbers you've already run 100 times, hoping they land differently this time. Level 5, the builder. The dumpster business survives because you promote the dispatcher's assistant, the one everyone underestimated, and double her pay before she has time to think about leaving. You are 38. You own 7 companies now, and what you've built finally has a name of its own on a real letterhead. It's stopped being a pile of separate deals. It's a holding company. The shift at this level is that you stop buying companies and start building the machine that buys companies. You set up a central management company sitting above all seven, handling accounting, insurance, hiring, and financing for every one of them. All the parts of running a business that each of them use to do badly and alone. Every company pays a management fee up to the parent for those services, and that fee is how cash climbs from the ground floor up to you. Structured, so the money pulls toward wherever the next deal needs it. You learn the most useful and most ruthless trick in the entire model here. Once a company you bought has paid its original loan down far enough, you refinance it. Fresh debt goes back on the business, and that new borrowed cash pays out to you as a dividend while you still own every share of the company. A dividend recapitalization. It means your original $65,000 can come back to you many times over without ever selling a single thing. The risk moves back onto the business. The cash comes home to you. You face a real choice here. Every voice in the industry tells you to package all seven companies, hire an investment banker, and sell the whole platform to a larger buyer for a number with a lot of zeros attached to it. The other path is to never sell at all, to hold these companies for decades and let them keep paying you every year instead of paying you once. You sit with both numbers spread across your kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, and you make the call that quietly decides what the next 20 years of your life actually look like. You don't tell anyone which way you're leaning yet, because the choice you make on that Sunday afternoon is the one thing that turns 7 companies into 17, and $65,000 into $370 million. That story's coming in part 2.